what's up everybody? This is kind of an impromptu little idea I had. So most of the videos that are on the site obviously are focused on the band, The Order of the Fly, but it's not the only thing that I've been working on lately, so I thought it might be kind of fun just to kind of throw some videos up there and show you guys what I'm working on. For those that do know me and do know the band, probably know a long time ago, maybe like 10 years or so, I put out a comic book called Ghastly Jack. Here's the second issue. The first issue I put out on newsprint because I was trying to go for that classic comic feel. This one, I didn't do that, and it was a much smaller print run, so there's only a few of these out there. But it was about this character, Ghastly Jack, and I kind of set it up, and it was mostly just me trying to teach myself how to do this stuff. This is him. This is he. So for the past few years, I've been really wanting to get back into it. In fact, when I was on deployment, I started watching a lot of videos and stuff in my downtime that kind of got me much more excited about making comics again and wanting to get back on the horse. The problem was I realized that I didn't really like the first two comics that I did. I thought that the story was kind of setting it up a little bit, and it was fun, and I was kind of just sort of winging it. I had a basic idea in the back of my mind of how I wanted the story to go, but it wasn't entirely, I was just kind of going to let it write itself as it went along. And it was mostly just an attempt to give it a shot and see if I could do it at all. But now I feel like I've grown a lot as both a writer and an artist. I've improved a lot of my techniques. I'm still definitely what I would consider amateur style and not at all a professional, but it's for an indie comic. It's just sort of like the nice thing about indie comics is that they're basically punk rock, but instead of a music form, it's on paper and you can do whatever you want. It doesn't really cost that much to print them. You could print them and try to get them into stores, or you could just print them like I did to sell, at shows or give away or just do something fun. So this is a page from the new, here, I'll show you a couple of other pages. The new one that I'm working on, it's page 5. The first few are these. So here's an example of some more finished kind of art. It's not the best. I'm not trying to show off or show anybody my amazing skills or anything here. I just wanted to show you what I've been working on. It's something that I'm not doing, this isn't something I'm trying to make my career out of or anything. It's an itch that I have to scratch, and it's something that I really enjoy. I really am a lifetime comic fan. And the comics that come out nowadays don't really seem to be the kind of comics that I enjoy as much, especially from the Marvel and DC. There's some great indie stuff out there, and there's also some good occasional, ones from the big two. But for the most part, it's just not the kind of stuff that has me excited. But there are some companies that do have me excited. One of them is called Alterna, and they brought back publishing cheap, affordable comics on newsprint, and I love that because I think that part of the reason why comics are in decline these days is because of the price point is tough to get into. Even if kids or somebody that's younger, is excited and wants to get into this hobby and follow the stories, if you're interested in sequential art, you're going to probably gravitate a lot more towards something like manga, however you say it, where it's much more accessible. For $10, you can get, a full, I don't know how many pages is in a typical one, 200-paged kind of a self-contained story, or even if it's episodic, it's going to be much more bang for your buck and much more dynamic art and action and stuff than a lot of the American comics have been doing lately. There's been a big emphasis on this kind of decompressed storytelling. So it's very postmodern. It's very writing, like what's called in writing for the trade. Comics are typically collected together in what are called trade paperbacks or graphic novels after 7 or 8 issues, 6 or 7 issues or so, and they so the writers are writing in this kind of decompressed format. So you get if you picked up an individual issue, you're not really going to see a whole hell of a lot happen. It's going to just be people sitting around talking most of the time. There'll be a couple of big action showpieces, but for the most part, it's just kind of. It's been, I don't know, it's more boring than I'm used to. And I grew up in the 70s and 80s really loving comics. And then in the 90s, a little less so, more getting into, I wouldn't say less so, but less so as far as the following Marvel and DC. And by that point, I pretty much had gravitated almost entirely to independent stuff. I checked out of Marvel and DC almost entirely, definitely out of Marvel, because of some like shady business practices that they had at the time. And which is funny because it's kind of the same reason I'm got out of Marvel again. It's just, people laud them, and definitely their creations are great, but the creations aren't a corporate thing. The creations were, something by like Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko. And Stan Lee gets all the credit, but to a much lesser degree. I mean, the guy was definitely the mouthpiece and the showman and what Marvel needed to sell the books. But the creation, the artists, like Stan Lee had like minimal input on one of the most famous characters of all time, and that's Spider-Man. And he gets all the credit. People, all these newbies and people that aren't really into the history of this medium, they look to that and they think, oh man, Stan Lee, he's the man, he created Spider-Man. But that was really Steve Ditko, who was an artist at Marvel, who was a much more off-kilter. He wasn't as, I don't think, as known, or definitely not as known as even Jack Kirby, who created most of the other characters that you know of from the Avengers and the X-Men, the classics. But Steve Ditko was kind of he was a more insular kind of a guy. He was into objectivism, Ayn Rand's objectivism, that caused a lot of friction for a lot of people that he worked with, probably Stan for sure. And he and Stan Lee famously didn't really get along that well. And Steve Ditko, towards the end of his run, I think he did like 30-some issues of Spider-Man and created the character. He really had was pretty much done with Marvel by that point. He would still work there, but it wasn't the same level of like commitment and creation. And he went on to create a lot of other characters that people know of, like Doctor Strange. That was almost entirely a Steve Ditko creation. He also created for DC, well, actually for Charleston Comics, which was like a smaller like publisher. He created or co-created Captain Atom. He created the character called The Question, and both of those characters were sort of imagined by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons in Watchmen, which is one of the number one top-selling graphic novel of all time. So a lot of so just to kind of get back to what I was talking about as far as like the newer stuff and Marvel's shady kind of practices and stuff. So I got out of reading Marvels and DCs pretty much in the 90s. I wasn't a huge fan of I kind of was at first a huge fan of like the Image, that 90s style that we think of, the really hyper rendered Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane style artwork. I did really like it at first, but then it seemed like that became like what everybody was trying to do, and every character from that point had to have this, like that sort of the Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld aesthetic with tons of pouches and crazy redesigned costumes and guns and shoulder pads and junk like that. And it got really like overdone, especially because I think Marvel at that time was flailing, trying to keep up with Image, who came out of, basically took all their stable of great artists and ran away with that. And they were trying really hard to sort of keep up. And I don't know, that era, a lot of people like it. I wasn't a huge fan. Now, when I look at 90s books, I mean, there's a reason why I think a lot of that stuff is in the quarter to dollar bins in comic stores, because it was huge print runs, not really any major lasting impact. I mean, I have like 2 copies of Spawn #1. I think they're worth like maybe $10. Everybody on Earth bought like that comic, so it's not going to be hard to find a really pristine copy if you're some collector. But stuff like that I really love. The era that really got me into, especially like superhero type comics, would have been the what's called the Bronze Age, the 70s to the 80s, early 80s, and that stuff, man, it still holds up. It's really great, and you can find. I go to a website a lot that's called mycomicshop.com to buy back issues, and I get tons of comics. That way, I pretty much stopped buying new stuff almost entirely, but I buy a lot of well, not really. I do buy some, but most of what I buy, it's like the stuff that I always, as a kid, I wasn't much of a collector, and it was comic stores when I was young. They existed, but it wasn't something that was near where I was at all. It was rare to find one. When I did find one, it was like Shangri-La, man. I freaking love that stuff. But for the most part, if I wanted to pick up a comic, I'd pick it up at Safeway, which is like our grocery store, or 7-Eleven, places like that. And so I wouldn't go every single week to try to pick something up. I'd go whenever I could. But it would be, 1 month I'd pick up a Captain America, 1 month I'd pick up ROM or Micronauts, 1 month it would be the Avengers. So it was, I didn't like stick with storylines as much. So now as an adult, I'm kind of like my midlife crisis purchasing is like buying all these issues that I remembered as when I was much younger, buying and never really knowing how they'd end, so I've been picking up a lot of Fantastic Four and the Avengers and Green Lantern and that kind of stuff that I loved, to sort of see where that story that I remembered starting, where it went, or if I picked up the last issue of some story arc, what happened before it, which is fun. So I kind of wanted to show this to you because I get asked a lot about my artwork, because I do a lot of designs and stuff for people, or I just do my own stuff. I do pretty much all the Order of the Fly stuff, except I have to say some news for that. We got a new album that's going to be coming out. It's being pressed, and the artwork is being printed. So by the end of summer, we'll have our new LP coming out. And I'll definitely do some more videos on that. But the pretty much all the artwork and stuff I've done, because I mean, before I even was ever wanted to be play a bass guitar or a guitar or anything, I was into art and comics and stuff like that. So I've got much more of my life devoted to this in the span of it than I did music, and I've always been a huge music fan. To me, the two are pretty closely linked. But I'm a visual guy, so I did all of our art because I love that stuff, and I like the design aspect of things as much as I like the music itself. I think the two are important to go together. But a lot of people have asked, how I do my art and stuff, and nowadays, art is so commonly done digitally. I stuck with the old ways of doing things, so I kind of just wanted to do this just as like a fun little thing. I'm not a professional artist by any means. I'd say like I'm a amateur that takes it like more seriously than not. I mean, I'm a trained artist. My undergrad degree is in studio art with an emphasis on painting. But more often than anything, the artwork that I do is this style, pen and ink. or brush and ink in this case. Well, both. Comic style. So here is how you do it. So if you are an indie kind of guy and you're curious about getting into this stuff and how you could like make your own comics, or how you could come up, how you can draw your own pages and stuff like that. If it's something that's interesting to you, it was something when I got into it, the only way you could learn would be through books, so I'd check out whatever I could find at the library that would show you how to do this kind of stuff. And that was how I learned how to do this. And that was like my real like art training. Cause by the time I went to college and took art classes there, it was very much focused on contemporary art. So there's a lot of, the actual draftsmanship skill that this is a skill. This isn't I wouldn't say this isn't art, this isn't going to hang in a gallery. But this requires technique that is different than, it's much different than painting, but it's different than the training I got in school. Most of what I got in school would have been conceptual, just sort of theory, defending your art, deciding what is art, what the meaning behind things are, justifying it. So it was less on the actual finished piece, technique-wise, than it was on the sort of argument behind it. But so to learn how to draw this way, this was something that I had to learn on my own, with no training, no anything. It was all trial and error, which is why I think I kind of developed my own little style, for better or worse. It's not, now you can go to places like the Joe Kubert School for Comic Art, which would have been, man, that's awesome. I would have totally tried to do that if I had been, if it had been around when I was younger. But instead, it was just trial and error and trying to like learn how to do this stuff and read about it. So what I use is the stuff that guys used back in the day. It's still used today. I mean, not every artist has transitioned to digital. A lot have, but a lot haven't. And there is a real, there's a definite difference visually between the two, although digital is coming up on traditional methods in a lot of ways where you can really see or where it's really becoming hard for me to even tell. Sometimes I see people's art and I don't know if it was done digitally or if it was done traditionally. But I like both. But for my own art, I like it to be traditional. So what I use is this paper. It's Strathmore Bristol board, smooth. You can get it what's called vellum, which has a bit more tooth to the paper, where it's kind of got it's got a little rougher edge. This is smooth, so the ink is very crisp on it. It doesn't get, you can hold really good detail. And then my inking, I pretty much do with. I used to do a lot of what was called a crow quill, which is I'll show you. It's an older dip pen where you dip it into ink, and 102 nibs. So this is these are the classic tools of all those old comics. This is a crow quill. It's a small nib. I would just buy tons of these when I could. And then it goes in this little plastic holder, and you dip it in a pot of ink, and then you draw like this, and it gives very fine lines. And then for larger lines and things, until I learned a lot more control, I use this brush, which is the sort of classic industry standard that you'd always read about. They're kind of pricey, not horrible, I guess. I mean, they're an investment if you're interested in doing this stuff, so it's worth it. It's the Winsor Newton Series 7 Sable brush, and this is a number 2. This is like the classic standard that pretty much every inker from the old days of comics would utilize. And then the ink I use is a Pelican waterproof India ink. There's a lot of different brands. I'm not, I've used Pelican, I've used Speedball, I've used, what are some of the other ones? Higgins. They're all kind of the same to me. I can't really tell the difference. For the most part, they all come out really watery, too watery for me. So I almost have to it takes, a week or two before the consistency gets to where it's dark enough. I hate it. The first few days of using it, it'll be like a wash until it dries out a little bit with the top off. But let's see. Those things right there. Oh, and then the other tools that I use mostly are pens like these. They're called Rapidographs. So it's just like a nice pen. There's a lot of people use those Micron drawing pens or pens like that are pretty high end. I prefer these. They're a little more of a pain in the butt. You got to keep them clean, and you refill them with India. They have their own ink as well. If it dries in the nib, so you've got this little kind of slightly waterproof top, and it's a very fine. This one's like a 0.5, I think. What does it say? Yeah, it's like a 0.5. This is a 0.8. They're kind of color coded. I mostly use these two to either line out like the lines of straight lines or things like when I do backgrounds, if there's like brick, like this kind of stuff. That would have been that. I went over it with brush because I like the sort of wobbly feel to it. But if I'm going to do something that's ruled out and straight, I guess that's not really the greatest example. Let me find another one. Like this, all that kind of stuff. So if I'm going to rule it out and use a ruler and try to find the perspective for things, then I'll use these. But for the most part, almost everything else I do is with this brush. I have a bunch of these, and they last a long time as long as you take good care of them. They're a little bit of a pain to take care of and maintain, but once you learn how to do that, which took me a long time too, because, in the world before YouTube, if you just have one book on the matter and it doesn't really talk about how to maintain it or clean it other than it says make sure you wash it, there's actually a very specific technique to washing that I luckily have learned from YouTube, and it's helped make these things last a lot longer. So I thought it'd be something you guys might think was kind of cool. So non-musical stuff, but this is the visual medium is something else that I'm also interested in. So I do a lot of design this way, and this comic I'm hoping to be finished by the end of summer. It's going slower than I thought. My process, I'm not really that speedy. As you can tell, I haven't even finished this panel, and I don't know how long I've been talking. But it'll be something that this is the story is going to kind of reset the whole thing. It's almost like considering the first two issues that I did non-canon, which is okay. They don't really this won't really contradict anything that happened in those issues. But like I said, I didn't really have any specific I had an overall story in mind, but nothing that was that would have an end point. Whereas this now, I've got about 9 issues planned out, and the script for this one, which usually I wouldn't script, I'd kind of just loosely give myself some ideas and then draw it out. But this is this will be much more traditional. Another thing that I'm doing differently this time that I didn't previously is that I'm going to try to do more. I am going to digitally letter this. My handwriting sucks, and I would letter the other issues. Like, for instance, I would do the lettering on the page itself. So this would take forever, and it would kind of get in the way of the actual design of the page. And I wasn't that great about getting, everything to fit exactly the way I wanted it. It worked kind of cool. Some pages I like it, like here, I like this. And here, this is okay. But a lot of it, would just get real clunky, or, if I didn't rule out perfectly these things, they'd look kind of, I don't know. I just didn't really enjoy it. I don't think it looks professional enough now. It's kind of, it's obviously just like my handwriting, and my handwriting would change over the course of one issue. So now I'm going to do it digitally. I'm kicking around the idea of actually hiring a letterer to do it to make it look really clean, but probably not. I like doing stuff myself. So that's it. I don't know if this is interesting to anybody, but just thought it'd be a fun little window into what I've been doing lately. So I was mostly working on this. The new album is going to be out, like I said, at the end of summer, and there's a lot of that thing is. I'm going to start doing some videos on that because I want to let people know about it, but also it's really this is the best thing that we've done. I'm real proud of it. I know all the guys in the band are real proud of it as well. We all worked super hard to make it something special. So the record's going to be really cool. It's going to be out on colored vinyl, similar to the last LP we did. It's 15 tracks. It's really kind of like nine songs with some sort of instrumental segue type pieces as well. But I think Order the Fly fans hopefully will really enjoy it. It definitely sounds like us. It's more cohesive sounding album than we've done, I think, ever, because one of the issues with all the other albums that we've done, other than the very first album, we would change members of the band like halfway through recording these things. And this is with our like longest and most, and what I consider like the real lineup now, because it's been together longer than any other lineup that the band has, and we all get along great. You know, we never have any sort of like ego battles or anything, or haven't been any falling outs, you know, between anybody. So it's more just like a family and friends. So I'm excited to show it to everybody. Thanks for watching this. I don't know if it's interesting, you know, like it, and please leave a comment and let me know if you want to see more of this kind of stuff. If you'd like to see me work through the process of making the comic, it's fun to do. I'd love to show you guys like what I work on as I go through it. So let me know. And that's it, man. Have a good day.